part of me wanted to make a rant about this. I could have made another 2-hour critique ripping the previous episode of Game of Thrones to shreds. This single episode was to the series what The Last Jedi was to Star Wars, a so incredibly badly written, logically inept, internally inconsistent, magnificently bad episode that all at once killed any investment I still had in this show. If I can bring myself to stomach the next 3 episodes, it'll be out of obligation rather than excitement, and it's a damn shame after the years spent watching it. If you are looking for a harsher critique, then head over to my friend Mauler's channel. He'll be sure to rip it to shreds in every discernible way. Maybe it's just that I'm jaded and frankly dead inside after watching this episode, or maybe it's the weariness of having already vented my anger on a previous livestream. But today I want to do something a little different. I'm not interested in making a video meticulously picking apart all the minutia of the episode, but rather to go with something a little bit more positive in this very negative situation. Badly written stories aren't anything new. They've been around since the dawn of literature and will continue to stick around until the end of time. Whether or not there's simply been an uptick in badly written narratives in recent times, or if it's simply the widespread exposure they receive with the popularity of the internet, is irrelevant. There will always be good stories and there will always be bad ones. What sucks, of course, is when a good story turns rotten. It's heartbreaking when something you care about and become deeply invested in crumbles until there's nothing left but a smoldering ruin of what it once was. Whether you connected with a story, a world, a character, it's devastating when bad writing turns something that was once great into something you look at with scorn. It's the stories people were connected to that seem to get the most traction. If a series starts terribly, then there's really no reason to do anything more than laugh at how bad it is. It's forgotten quickly, most people unanimously agree that it sucked, and then they laugh at the memory of it. The same can't be said of something like Game of Thrones or Star Wars. Those both began excellently, introducing us to a cast of memorable and lovable characters, sucked us into a world that was grandiose and interesting, and told us a story that's unlikely to be forgotten. Both, however, have suffered in recent years from terrible storytelling decisions that left fans feeling polarized at best and betrayed at worst. Naturally, we as fans ask ourselves how and why the story turned so sour. In both cases, it's in part the writers trying to subvert the expectations of the viewer, but in doing so, cheat them by creating a setup without giving it a satisfying payoff. In others, it's the decision to turn a beloved character into something they're not, leaving us with a shell of a person we all grew attached to. In that search for answers to our grievances, many people take to the internet to vent out their understandable anger for what was done to the story. There's this idea that we as the viewers are somehow to blame for our anger as though it's our fault for caring. The most passionate responses to badly written stories often come from the people most invested in what's happening. We don't want to just stop watching if we don't like it. We want it to be good because we care. And for some reason, that level of investment is seen as a joke by the people who, more often than not, were not particularly invested in it themselves. And it's because of these responses to the bad that inevitably something good can come out of it. I always see responses to my videos saying that I'm always negative, which isn't even true, and that it's tiring to see nothing positive come out of it. The purpose of my channel, however, and the purpose of many others like it, is to deconstruct the bad so in the future we can have more good. By taking a deeper analysis of a work, looking past the visual flair that temporarily distracts us from the substance of the work, and critically deconstructing a story so that we can understand fully why it doesn't work, we inform people as to how to avoid these kinds of mistakes. The Azor Ahai prophecy has been built up early on in Game of Thrones, and it's been very specific with who and what it should apply to. Jon Snow in both the book and the show was most obviously Azor Ahai, and the one meant to wield Lightbringer, which would strike the killing blow to the Night King. Obviously it's a bit different in the book, but you catch my meaning. It's important to illustrate that this isn't a fan theory. This is something that has been told to the audience for years. It's been central to the arc of Jon Snow. It's his entire purpose in the series. By removing this prophecy, you not only make entire plotlines from the show utterly irrelevant, but you'll make Jon Snow's presence in the show meaningless. He's nothing now. My issue with Arya killing the Night King isn't that she wouldn't be capable of doing it, it's that she shouldn't have done it. Jon's entire story arc has been stolen from him. From the beginning, this has been his battle to fight. He's been waging this war against the army of the dead since the very first season. Because the writers decided that subverting the expectations of the viewer was more important than a satisfying payoff, the vast majority of Game of Thrones fans are left with bitter disappointment, of which we're mocked for because we committed the grievous sin of giving a shit. Likewise, with The Last Jedi, we see the hero of the story, Luke Skywalker, a disheveled, bitter, antisocial man who doesn't care about his friends, his family, or the rest of the galaxy. This is all a direct contradiction to his character that was established over the course of 3 films. He became this way by plotting to murder his nephew because of wrongthink, which results in turning his nephew evil and murdering murdering his other students. This is an inadequate explanation for a variety of reasons. Luke, at his core, will do anything to protect his friends and family. That's a fundamental truth of the character that cannot be contradicted unless given an extremely good reason to do so. In Return of the Jedi, Luke spends the entire film trying to turn Darth Vader back to the light just based on the mere fact that they're related. This despite the fact that Vader murdered his mother, brought about galactic genocide, stood by and condoned the destruction of an entire planet, ordered the execution of his aunt and uncle, murdered his mentor, tried to shoot him down and in the process killed more of his friends, tortured his best friend, and cut off his hand just before revealing the fact that he was his father. There was no reason for Luke to love him, but he was family, and just based on that simple fact, he did everything in his power to save him. His outburst of anger on the Death Star came only after Vader threatened to harm his sister, which Vader has more than enough of a track record to prove he could and very well would do. Afterward, he sets his lightsaber aside and still, even after the duel, refuses to harm his father. Ben Solo, on the other hand, has done absolutely nothing wrong aside from talking to somebody that Luke disagrees with. Setting aside the fact that it makes no sense how Ben managed to get in contact with Snoke, how and when Snoke taught him anything, and just who or what exactly Snoke is, Ben's dark thoughts are light years lesser than even the least bad thing that Darth Vader has done. Rather than talk to him and do everything in his power to change Ben's path, he was ready to murder his nephew in his sleep. This directly contradicts everything we know of the character and all the development he received over the course of the original story. Everything he learned is thrown out the window in favor of explaining away why he became a Yoda-style hermit. Only where Yoda had a legitimate reason to seclude himself from the rest of the galaxy, Luke doesn't. And his refusal to help his friends and family in their time of need turns him into a selfish asshole instead of the altruistic hero we knew and loved. These are obviously just a couple issues with only two different stories. I could continue for hours explaining why episode 3 of season 8 was so awful, or why The Last Jedi is the worst film in the series. I could go on for literal years explaining bad writing in 1,000 movies, books, shows, comics, and video games. The bottom line, ultimately, is that bad writing decisions ended up crippling what could have otherwise been excellent stories. In concept, I'm okay with Jon Snow not being the one who deals the killing blow to the Night King. Also in concept, I'm okay with Luke Skywalker becoming the dejected hermit who failed miserably in his task to recreate the Jedi Order. But in neither case were these decisions earned. These were decisions made to subvert the expectations of the viewer and thus cheated them. You can't have all this wonderful setup only to result in nothing. Case in point, the entire Canobite plotline going absolutely nowhere. Conceptually, this plotline ending in failure is not necessarily a bad idea. What cripples it is that nothing was gained. No information on the First Order was gained, no character-altering development happened, and there was no tangible impact on the plot or characters. If you're going to have a subplot end in failure, then it needs to have an alternative effect on the world, characters, or overall narrative. If Rose and Finn never went to Canto Bight, then absolutely nothing in the movie would be any different. You could remove this from the story entirely and absolutely nothing changes. If that's the case, then it's filler and thus not relevant to the film in any way and should not have been included in the first place. In the case of Game of Thrones, if they really wanted Arya to make that final kill, they could have had a very Éowyn and Merry versus the Witch King style fight. Only instead of Jon stabbing the Night King in the face and vanquishing him, he could stab him in the chest or stomach and Arya could stab him in the back. Obviously, these are just quick fixes off the top of my head. If it were up to me, I'd start back at the last episode of season 4 and rewrite everything from that point forward. And in the case of Star Wars, I just wouldn't have ever made another movie after episode 6. This is simply a means to demonstrate that these are concepts that in practice can work in a certain context without trivializing the setup and failing on the payoff. I'm not utilizing fan theories, I'm using exactly what the stories tell us themselves. Frankly, I find most fan theories hilariously stupid. I don't bother listening to them or coming up with my own because it's an utter waste of my time. So how exactly does thinking of a theoretical quick fix that isn't going to happen turn out to be a good thing in the long run? Well, that's what brings it back to the whole point of criticizing storytelling in general. In finding solutions to fix things that went wrong, future writers are less likely to make those same mistakes. By using a critical eye, you can prevent your own stories from suffering the same fate of those that failed. Obviously, a mistake may slip through the cracks, but by applying a standard of consistency and logic to all stories, including your own, you have it in you to create something better. And for those that have no intention of writing their own stories, applying this standard may make you despise some stories, but may make you fall in love with the ones that are great. It's not a bad thing to harshly critique a bad story because it's given me so much more appreciation for the ones that are truly great. A badly written narrative that tries to set up emotional payoffs might succeed, but it would be cheating you, while a well-written narrative that effectively sets up an emotional payoff will be more impactful and honest. Too often, if I find something I like, I'm forced to describe it as, it's good, but it's internally inconsistent. But the characters are stupid. But the world building is weak. Now, obviously, you can still like something that has flaws, but the less flaws there are, the objectively better it is. We don't call them flaws as if it's a point of endearment. We call them flaws because it's something that the writers didn't think of or badly communicated. They were things that could have and should have been fixed. And when you find that one story that is internally consistent, that does have well-written characters, that does have strong world building, and that does have a strong, impactful narrative, you'll have more appreciation for it. And if you're an aspiring writer, be it someone who wants to write a series of novels, a comic, a TV show, a movie, or a video game, then by recognizing the bad and establishing an objective reason why it's bad, and furthermore how it can be fixed, then the likelihood of you're suffering the same mistake is significantly lessened. Oftentimes the story ideas I'd like to write end up being similar to ideas I loved in concept but failed miserably in execution. Very few ideas for a story are ever truly bad, but rather have the potential for greatness depending on the writer. A good writer can make the worst story seem great, and a bad writer can make the best story seem like shit. In analyzing and critiquing films, whether on YouTube or in my regular day-to-day life, I've been able to improve my own writing. Pieces that didn't quite fit before, I've been able to rework into something much stronger. Mistakes I made in the past will no longer be repeated because I'm constantly thinking critically about my own writing, searching for ways to improve its quality. Trust me, I know as well as anyone else how much it sucks to fall in love with a great story and watch it die. To see something you've put so much time and investment in crumble due to weak writing is a crushing feeling and makes you regret ever becoming invested in the first place. Yet at the same time, we wouldn't have had the good if not for the bad. It's the bad that elevates the great above the rest. It's the bad that teaches us how to avoid the same fundamental mistakes. It's the bad that gives us a critical eye to avoid those mistakes ourselves. As much as the latest Game of Thrones killed my love for this series, it serves as an important lesson for writers everywhere. You can never cheat the audience. You can't have years of setup only to abandon it entirely when the very setup is meant to come into play. Don't use subversion just for subversion's sake. It's okay to shock the audience with something unexpected, turn the tables, make some new and inventive twist that breaks barriers and defies classic tropes, but you can't use it at the cost of the story's consistency. All too often, subversion tactics only tarnish everything great about what came before until the story and characters are forgotten, their legacy turned to dust, the work of the writer thrown right out the window. Allow yourself to take criticism, draft, redraft, pick your story apart, and moreover, send it to people and tell them to pick it apart as well. Don't keep it all private in fear of harsh critique, because without it, you can never improve. You may like to think your story is perfect in its first draft, but not even the greatest writers have neglected the importance of honest and fair critique. Nobody wants to have their story shat on. Nobody wants to have their work picked apart. At the same time, it's a necessary evil in order to improve. To create a good story, you need those people in your life that are critical of your work, and you need to be one of those people yourself. As bad as many stories nowadays are, every writer has it within themselves to do better, and you should always strive to understand and correct the mistakes made by other writers. Their failures can be your success. One badly written show can give way to an excellently written one. But just remember that no matter how hard you try, no matter how good of a writer you are, nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, will ever fix this horrifying abortion.